Welcome to the Got Academy podcast. Hi everybody! Hello, Francesca Lewis. How are you doing?
Hello. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Really happy to have you on the podcast, The Gotributor. I'm doing very well. I'm going to talk about what Game of Thrones means from an existential perspective.
Just the easy question.
Yes, exactly. So it will take like 2 minutes, 3 minutes tops, right? Yeah. So when you look at this fantasy story, what are the first existential questions that pop to your mind? Because and this is also your field of expertise, right?
Yeah, I mean, so just to say a little bit about my field of expertise, as you put it.
Really a high bar to start with, right?
Yeah, as the world's leading expert on this topic.
Exactly. It's like a comic who say, "I welcome the funniest man on earth. Welcome to the stage." Everybody's like, "Okay."
So I'm doing a PhD at the moment in women's studies, but my background is literature initially and sort of literary criticism, creative writing, and then I moved on from that to looking at subjectivity, so like the inner life of psychology. I did a master's in psychology. Okay. And now I'm kind of combining those things using an existential perspective, or what they call a phenomenological perspective. So it's the study of life as it appears to us, not as it is necessarily.
And you apply that into gender studies.
And I'm applying it to a particular mental health diagnosis, the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. I'm sort of doing a critical study of that, but from an existential perspective, using literature.
Like the difference in diagnosing that between men and women?
Well, it's very commonly diagnosed in women, so that's kind of the element that makes it quite gendered. But my angle is a lot more the existential side. So I'm not an existential expert.
Okay, I don't know if anybody is. Okay, so what do you feel are the existential questions in a story with dragons and dire wolves and monsters and kings and lords and knights?
So one of the sort of points of resonance between Game of Thrones and existentialism is using Camus, who some say wasn't an existentialist. He said he wasn't an existentialist, but he's often talked about in that same context.
Okay. We're talking about Albert Camus, the French writer.
Camus, yeah. Particularly two books which he wrote in the same year. Your favourite book, I believe, one of your favourite books, The Stranger, and his philosophical essay, which is in some ways like one of the only explicitly philosophical things they actually wrote, The Myth of Sisyphus. Have you read that?
No, I have not.
Okay.
Should I?
So, yeah, I mean, it's. I think it's interesting, and it's interesting to think about it in relation to Game of Thrones. Okay. So the kind of thrust of The Myth of Sisyphus, which is based on the Greek myth, which involves a guy being cursed by the gods, as people often were in Greek times, to continuously push a boulder up to the top of a hill. And then when it got to the top, the boulder would roll back down to the bottom and he would have to push it back up again. Yeah. And that would be his life forever. Yeah. So Camus looks at this and he says this is a sort of apt analogy for life and for the so-called meaning of life, in the sense that it's this sort of futile, unknowable, we're all pushing the boulder up the hill, we don't know why, who for, what the purpose of it is. So his way of answering that, because a lot of existentialists sort of said that life is meaningless, or it's sort of without any intrinsic meaning. Yeah. But for Camus, the way out of that is to make our own meaning by throwing ourselves into whatever life we have, by sort of, grabbing on, to the sucking the melon out of life,
Okay. I have a few questions about it, about The Stranger, but first I want to try and connect it a little bit to Game of Thrones, and then we'll go to The Stranger. So, how do you connect this, like life without intrinsic meaning, and into the story where we put the meaning, or the characters? You're referring to the characters, or to us as readers or viewers?
Whether it was the writers or George R.R. Martin is up for debate, but the ending, the controversial ending, kind of fits into this idea. Like, everybody was quite angry at the end because, like, oh, it didn't mean anything. But then there was the talk at the end where Tyrion and the other lords were gathered, and Tyrion said that kind of all that matters is the story we make of this. All that matters is what these events mean to us and what we do with them. Right.
What we decided they mean.
Yeah, what we've decided they mean, essentially. Because there is no other meaning other than what we decide things mean. So something like the Night King, people were, I was quite annoyed. I was thinking it was really building up to being significant and having some sort of relevance, but kind of the fact that it didn't do that signifies the idea that, these great existential threats, like, that they don't have any meaning in and of themselves. They've got nothing to tell us. They've got no great mystery, There is no Azor Ahai,
Yeah. And even the writers don't have anything to tell us. It's just the meaning that we put on the story.
Yeah.
In some way.
Yeah, I think you could read that the writers, by having that bit at the end, are kind of saying, like, oh, okay, you don't like what we've done? Well, you make up what you like, and you say we did it.
And what about the characters? Okay, maybe also the characters themselves, like Ned. So he thought there was some kind of meaning to life, right? Being honorable, doing the right thing, ostensibly, if we buy that he was doing the right thing. And then, no, there was nothing to it. That's not it. And even the High Sparrow. Do you remember, like the last shot where he was looking all shocked, realizing that Cersei was not coming? Like, he had this idea that everything that was happening in the story had to do...
was happening for a reason.
For a reason, and that he knew what the reason was, right? It was the gods and the seven. I think, no, you're just like an extra in her story because she outmaneuvered you. Not because of some inherent thing or meaning or value.
Yeah, definitely. I think actually Ned is an interesting character to consider in relation to the Camus stuff in particular, because his sort of story, that his imprisonment, is interesting to think about in relation to The Stranger. Part of what happens in The Stranger is that this character is convicted of a murder, and he doesn't do anything to help himself because he won't lie or exaggerate or claim to have feelings or views or reasons or motives that he doesn't have. Yeah. And so in a way he kind of goes to his death his own man. Yeah. Whereas Ned would have done that, except for Varys, who I love, by the way. Varys is my favourite character. Okay. But yeah, unfortunately, Varys, convinced him to do what Sartre calls acting in bad faith. He convinced him to proclaim to have values and beliefs that he does not have, to say that Joffrey is the legitimate heir, when that's not in line with his true self. Yeah. Whereas if he had just said, because he died anyway, right. And if he had just said, no, I'm not on board with this, I don't like this guy. Something weird going on here, I'm not cool with it.
And also, like in The Stranger, there was this priest, right, that came to his kind of like Varys, and tried to ask him, so what was the deal? What was it? And there was, actually, I just started this week rereading it in French.
Oh, wow, cool.
Which is a little bit harder than I anticipated, so I'm moving along slowly. I read it in Hebrew a while ago, but if I remember correctly, like there's this big like monologue speech that he gives the priest, right? Like you're looking for something that is not there. What do you want me to say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the priest wants him to embrace God, and he's an atheist, and he's just like, no, that's not going to save me. That's in the myth of Sisyphus, Camus says that sort of religious belief, thinking that the answer, that we cannot know the answer, but God knows, that is a kind of philosophical suicide, as he calls it. That it's, in the way that suicide is, in his view, sort of giving up on trying to find any meaning in life, sort of appealing to a outside authority that's also, that's a kind of philosophical version of that you're giving up on finding your own meaning and giving up the reins to someone else and telling them, you do it, you tell me what it all means. So, in The Stranger, he doesn't do that. He's true, for better or worse, he's true to himself up until the end.
Right, and the book is very notable in that the way that he writes it is there is no real soul or meaning or agency in the things that he's doing throughout the story. It's like very distant and objective. I don't know if that's the term, or neutral, maybe.
Yeah.
Right, describes this is happening, right? The famous opening with his mom dying, just like in a very bland way that you just like that shocks you just the beginning. Like, is this how you're describing the death of Maman? Are there other characters in the story in Game of Thrones that you feel have some Camus in them?
Well, I think there's kind of a theme of this thing of people being imprisoned, and because it obviously happens again after Ned with Tyrion twice.
Right. And even Jamie and John, everybody, you're right.
Yeah, so it happens quite a lot. And I haven't really sort of been able to find an obvious, that version with Ned. It's quite obvious what the sort of existential meaning there is. But the different characters, they definitely handle it differently. Like, Tyrion is kind of more in Varys's sort of mode. He's more about doing whatever needs to be done. He's quite happy to act in bad faith and to just do whatever needs to be done, whatever compromise needs to be made in order to survive or to get the best outcome. Like in Marine, he makes the agreement with the slave masters and it doesn't work because, he's not as smart as he thinks he is, I guess.
Yeah.
In some ways, because he kind of has a downfall towards the end. At the beginning, we see him as this guy who, knows, he says, I drink and I know things. He's this guy who's known, he reads a lot, he knows a lot. In some ways, he's got that all-knowing eye that Bran has, that is so prized as what makes Bran worthy to be the king. But he kind of lacks integrity. He just does whatever... he means well with the things that he does, but I suppose at least from Sartre's existentialist perspective, the flaw in what he's doing is that he's not acting from his values. He's just doing what he thinks the other person wants. He's giving people what they want or being what other people want him to be. That can never have a good outcome. I'm not sure if I necessarily believe that, but that's certainly what Sartre would say.
So there is a recurring theme in Game of Thrones of disillusionment, right? That people think that something is going to happen in a certain way and then it doesn't. And then in some way, maybe it's also like each of them has an existential crisis as to what the world is, what it should be, their role in it.
They're looking to others. John is sort of always looking for some kind of like surrogate father figure who's going to tell him, even Daenerys in a way is that, someone who he can believe in instead of believing in himself,
Right.
And even one of the interesting characters to think about in terms of Camus' existentialism, or Camus' absurdism as it's known, because meaninglessness is known as the absurd, is Arya and her sort of faceless man, no one quest. Because there's another kind of strange resonance with the stranger in that one of the seven gods is called the stranger.
Yeah.
And they're kind of similar to the faceless men. They're all about like meaninglessness and just acting, not really having a self. So you can definitely relate that to the faceless men. So she seeks that out, and she does that. She kind of cuts herself off from the outside world and from the expectations and the roles and the outside opinions of that everybody else is living by. This Game of Thrones that everyone else is in. She kind of removes herself from that. But in that phrase, all men must die, all men must serve, it's all about who you serve. So she has the right idea at first, in that she's breaking herself down into someone that isn't controlled by outside forces. But then, when she's going along with the faceless men, and this is why she can't ultimately stay there, all she's then been asked to do is serve another cause that isn't her own. And, being asked to act against her own values again with, being asked to kill people that she doesn't want to kill and not kill people that she does want to kill. Whereas she, when she leaves, she kind of goes, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to act from my values.
And then she's like, okay, so my name is Arya Stark of Winterfell and I'm going home. So she decides that the meaning of life is family, the pack. But even then at the end, she just says, okay, nothing. I'm just going to go somewhere else.
Yeah, I didn't like that.
You didn't like that?
I didn't like how a lot of what they did with her. I really liked that decision that she made to, like you say, she decides that what matters is this thing of the pack, of, the Stark family. But she doesn't believe that because she's been told to, because she's just following a role that's been assigned her. She really believes it. She truly is acting from her genuine beliefs.
Yeah.
If we kind of bracket out the idea that D&D are just stupid, and that the writing is just bad.
Okay.
If we just put that aside and take the story as it is, then I suppose you could read her killing the Night King as she is the embodiment of, a true free agent acting on choice, acting on her own intrinsic, inner values that aren't coming from anyone else. And so she is the person to end this sort of ultimate threat. But I guess it depends what you think the White Walkers symbolise. Something that I can say something about the, once again, controversial ending.
It's not really controversial. Everybody agrees it was horrible.
So did you see that piece in Scientific American about... it was about the sociological versus the psychological view.
Did not like that piece one bit. I think it was just like really trying hard to find some patterns that are not there. So, okay, for people who haven't read it, it's about someone says that George R. R. Martin is good in writing sociological elements, and Dan and Dave were good writing psychological elements. And the reason that we are unhappy with the ending is because of this switch from the big sociological issues into the little psychological issues. That's the gist of it.
Yep.
The reason I disagree, first of all, I have some evidence. So we started with Noga doing the On the Couch videos after season 6, I think, before people started complaining, before the show started really, really, really deteriorating. And all the psychological elements, pure psychoanalytical elements, they were all there. That's how we based 15 videos, and we could have done whatever about every single character. You had like Freudian elements and Jungian elements, and every kind of theoretician you could apply to this or that character. And I think it's just like working really hard to find a way to make sense of something that has no meaning. They're just not good. They're not good. They're not good in writing character motivations, which is basically the psychological elements of the characters.
Yep.
They are certainly not good in writing anything sociological. They know nothing about political questions. But I think this is just like throwing them a lifeline that they do not deserve, and just like trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. Like it really annoyed me reading this piece.
I see what you mean. I liked it, but I did think it kind of overstated its point a little bit. I think sociological versus psychological is quite reductive. But I do think that George R. R. Martin is interested in history. primarily. I mean, I'm speaking to you now from York, which is Winterfell, so I know the story behind all that stuff. And also not just history, but the sort of, the political machinations which we see in, those types of conversations about grain and coin and the Iron Bank and even these, discussions that were always my favourite scenes, the sort of walks through the gardens or the kind of, discussions in the throne room between people like Varys and Littlefinger and other characters around them. And when the show was drawing from his material, that was mainly what it was about. It was about a fantastical imagining of slightly altered historical events, focusing on political realism to an extent, compared to usual fantasy. Yeah. But then when the showrunners became the people that were actually creating the stories, once, we can assume they were going by some sort of outline, but that's not much to go by. Yeah. I think that they are driven by two things: entertainment value, i.e., they're pulling the strings from on high, like, ha, you didn't know that was going to happen. They're very much driven by that, the sort of Hollywood popcorn munching kind of motivation. Mm-hmm. And then the other side of it is very poor attempts at psychological, character-driven stories. So it's all about, like, people, like when Daenerys destroys the Red Keep, and they said, she does that because she looks at it and she sees it as a symbol of everything that was taken away from her. Yeah, it's like that's like something someone might do. I mean, it's a bit much, but we can kind of imagine why someone might do something like that. But it's not saying anything. It's not meaningful. There's no, like someone like George R. R. Martin is going for that psychological, political, historical view, or if someone was writing this from a more philosophical point of view, they might be trying to say something about existentialism, which I don't think is what he's trying to do. You can just read that into it. But they're not doing that. They're not trying to say anything. Right. And that's the problem. Right. Is that it loses any drive. There's nothing behind it anymore.
In a lot of their interviews and whatever speeches when they receive awards, the way that they refer to the story is through the characters. They're just like, we didn't... they don't say that we didn't invent this world, this is George R. R. Martin's world. They say it's his characters. We're just playing along with the characters, as if detaching the characters from the world, as if they are not just...
As if they're real people. It's like, what would John do? And that's not telling a story then, that's like a soap opera. It's just people in a situation and then acting from character.
Yeah, and you have to think about John is a direct result of his social and political stature in this world, which is a result of hundreds and hundreds of years of history and all the political situations, of hundreds and thousands of different things. Like, everything can make sense if you disconnect it from the context.
So, I definitely think that there's a lot in Game of Thrones that resonates with existential ideas. There's characters that resonate with it, there's events that resonate with it, and there's kind of core ideas there about choice and living according to your values and things like that. But I don't think that means that it's an existentialist story or that it is intended to be existentialist in any way. But, any text, you can apply any lens to any text and find interesting things there. And in some ways, it's interesting to speculate about why so many of these kind of ideas have crept into this story, which isn't supposed to be about that. I guess if it's supposed to be about history and just people realistically living, then, of course, it's going to be full of existential questions because life is full of existential questions. Yeah. So, in a strange way, I think those existential questions have just organically grown out of, George R.R. Martin's tortured soul or whatever.
Yeah, I think like he left a lot of spaces in between everything for us to pour meaning into. Also, the text is very long, which is kind of like the Bible. You can interpret it in you can find in it anything that you want to find in it. Okay, and when you were watching it, were you looking for these existential elements, being an existentialer?
It was only when it came to the end, and this Tyrion, it was Tyrion's speech that tipped me off, that made me say, like, hang on a minute, there's no meaning except the meaning that we make. That sounds familiar. So yeah, it's kind of, in a way, I think it's my way of coping with that final season. It's my way of hanging on to something that, it's my way of finding meaning, I guess, in the show.
And you know what? I think that this, the Gotributor series, I really think that this is exactly what you said now. Like, we don't want to let them decide, D&D decide what the story is. We didn't like it when they told us this is the story. No. We want to give it our own meaning, and each person with their own angle, according to their own education and their own life experience, living here, living there, doing this, doing that. But I don't know, like any show that is out there that people are watching and that is popular. Let me know.
I can think of stuff already, actually.
Okay, shoot me a few. Yeah. Give me a few.
The show that I know the most about, which is my sort of, favorite baby of a show, is Buffy. So, have you watched it?
I watched it, not the whole thing, but I've watched a lot.
Okay.
My brother just.
So I've watched the whole thing many times. I kind of know it backwards and forwards. And unlike Game of Thrones, Buffy is supposed to be an existentialist story because Joss Whedon is an existentialist and he's spoken about that at length. So it was intended to be existential. So that gives us a different type of text to look at that's actually meant to be, and not just existential because I said so, like Game of Thrones.
Okay,
so that would be kind of interesting to look at.
I want to do it. There's a lot of people are really into Buffy. I don't know if it's our audience, but yeah. Okay, so let's do it. Okay, so thank you very much, Francesca, and thank you everybody for listening in. Bye, everybody.